The king and queen stood in the center of the throne room, staring at the empty, velvet-lined cradle. The queen pressed her palms against the cold stone wall, her breath hitching in the silence. They had prayed for years, and today, the castle air finally shifted. A sharp, clear cry echoed from the royal chambers. They hurried through the corridors, pushing past the heavy doors to find the source. A baby girl had arrived, her skin glowing like the first light of dawn. They named her Princess Rose. The king signaled the guards to ring the castle bells,
and the gates were thrown open to the kingdom. A grand feast began in the courtyard.
Fairies descended from the clouds, their wings blurring in the afternoon sun, to gather around the cradle. One whispered beauty as she leaned close. Another followed, murmuring a sweet voice into the quiet air. A third fairy placed a hand over the child, adding kindness to the growing list of blessings. Servants poured wine and carried platters of fruit into the great hall, while the castle walls vibrated with the sound of music. The kingdom believed the wait was finally over. The music died. The heavy oak doors groaned, then splintered inward with a crack that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. A shadow swept across the floor, blocking the light as an uninvited guest stepped into the hall. She moved toward the cradle, her presence draining the warmth from the room. She pointed a gnarled finger at the child. At 16, a spindle shall pierce her finger, and she shall die. The figure dissolved into a plume of black, acrid smoke that clung to the tapestries. The youngest fairy stepped forward, her hands trembling as she raised a wand. She cast her spell into the cooling air. The princess shall not die. She will sleep for 100 years. The king did not hesitate. He signaled the captain of the guard, his voice hard and fast. Find every spindle in the kingdom. Collect them. Burn them. By dusk, a massive pyre burned in the courtyard, casting long, flickering shadows against the stone walls. The smoke rose high, twisting into the night sky, but the heavy silence remained. Guards patrolled the perimeter with weapons drawn. They were prepared for an army, but they were fighting a shadow that had already taken root. Every wooden frame, every spinning tool was fed to the flames, yet the king watched the fire with his hand gripped tight to his sword. 16 years passed, and the urgency of the king had faded into routine. The guards at the gates grew lax, their attention drifting from the perimeter to the courtyard. Princess Rose moved through the castle with a curiosity that the heavy walls could no longer contain. She climbed the winding stairs of the north wing, finding a door that had been sealed with iron bolts. She pushed. The metal shrieked against the stone, and the door swung open, revealing a spiral staircase choked with cobwebs. She ascended into the highest tower, where the air grew thin and cold. At the top, another door stood slightly ajar. She stepped inside. The room was bathed in dim gray light. In the far corner, an old woman sat on a wooden stool, her hands moving in a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. A spindle hummed, drawing thin gray thread from a pile of wool. Rose stepped closer, her boots silent on the floorboards. The spinning motion was precise, mechanical, and entirely singular. She stopped inches away. The tip of the spindle caught the light, a point of sharp, polished steel. Rose reached out. Her fingers hovered near the spinning metal, pulled by a sudden, heavy gravity that made the room tilt. She took a breath, reached further, and the world seemed to hold its own. The metal tip bit deep into her fingertip. A single drop of blood welled, dark and bright, before she slumped to the floor. Outside, time shattered. The cook mid-motion dropped his copper spoon, the sound swallowed before it could ring against the stone. The king froze on his throne, a goblet halfway to his lips. High above the courtyard, a flock of birds hung motionless in the air, wings locked in mid-stroke. Then, the earth buckled. Massive vines erupted from the soil, lashing out like whips to weave a wall of thorns that swallowed the castle in a suffocating, impenetrable cage. The world outside forgot the keep. Seasons bled into one another, turning the thorns into a mountain of tangled, gray wood. 100 years passed in the blink of an eye. Then, the silence broke. A rhythmic thud echoed against the wall of thorns. A blade flashed, biting into the wood. The prince swung again, his shoulders burning with the effort. He did not retreat. He hacked a path through the dense, twisted barrier, and as his blade made contact, the thorns did not resist. They pulled back, blooming with roses, yielding to his steel as he stepped into the courtyard of the dead. The prince pushed past the heavy chamber door, his breath hitching as he saw the figure on the floor. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt. The silence in the attic was absolute, heavy with the weight of a century. He reached out, his hand trembling, and took her fingers in his own. "Wake up," he whispered. The words hung in the air, a command that shattered the stillness. Rose drew a sudden, sharp breath. Her eyelids fluttered and opened. Below them, the world roared back to life. A clatter of metal rang out as the cook's spoon finally struck the floor. Outside, dogs began to bark, and birds resumed their flight across the sky. The king blinked on his throne, the goblet in his hand tilting as he finished his drink. He stood, his gaze rushing toward the tower. The thorns covering the castle walls withered and fell away, leaving behind only the scent of fresh roses. Joy flooded the halls. The staff moved with frantic, relieved energy, preparing the great banquet hall. 7 days and 7 nights of music and dance followed. The wedding feast filled the courtyard with light, and as the bells rang out across the kingdom, the memory of the curse vanished, leaving only the promise of a long and peaceful reign.